It is NRN Radio 786. A very good day and welcome. Of course, this is the program with the views that hit the news with myself, Tashriq Truebody. All right, the past 2 years have certainly clarified many things about world powers and the balance of those powers and where they stand on issues of justice. And standing in the face of these entities is the axis of resistance, the iconic initiative taken by the Palestinian resistance on October the 7th was soon followed by the support by Hezbollah in Lebanon and later the Ansarallah Movement in Yemen, Iran as well, and other resistance factions in the region that have all played their supportive roles in opposing Zionism and its plans for the region. We're now joined by Dr. Rania Masri, a Palestinian-Lebanese human rights activist, environmental scientist, and university professor and writer. Dr. Rania, lovely to chat to you on a very iconic anniversary that will, I suppose, hold true for generations to come. A very good day to you and welcome to Radio 786.
Wonderful to be with you again. Thank you.
Let's get to understanding, of course, Operational Aqsa Flood on this day 2 years ago. Of course, at the time, the context was the regular and frequent attacks on Masjid al-Aqsa, which Hamas had warned will be met with resistance. And then, of course, hence the October 7th Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. To this day, there remains to be questions about the catalyst by the resistance for this moment and whether or not there are Israeli fingerprints over it. And, this has often been, part of the sort of, in part, the propaganda campaigns that we've seen. But upon the reflection, let's do that reflection, 2 years back to where we are now. What are your thoughts on the infamous October 7th?
My thoughts remain as they were when I first heard about it, that the October 7th was a marvelous strategic plan. It was meticulously organized and powerfully conducted. The idea that men who had been stuck in Gaza in a concentration camp for more than a decade had still managed to find the means, one, to escape from this concentration camp using inventive ways of flying, and then to know where to go, to have the espionage and the intelligence to be able to direct that and to know how to land and then to know how to operate and then to be able to come back. The fact that they managed to do all that and that they were united as Palestinian factions in Gaza to do that, to me, is a testimony to the spirit of people who reject surrender, the spirit of people who hold on to the idea of freedom and the idea that we are the ones who are sovereign in our lands. This is what October 7th continues to be, not simply for myself, but for a range of communities around the world that see it as a testimony to people's cry for freedom.
And how has, this certainly changed the dynamics of the region? I'll, of course, come to the latest Trump American proposal and how that is playing itself out into contemporary sort of the moment that we are in. But certainly one can admit that this was a turning point in some way, not just in what we saw with the coming together in unison of the axis of the resistance, but since then, of course, we've seen a massive groundswell of people becoming, I know woke these days have different interpretations, but the propaganda campaign, particularly in the United States, that took stranglehold over the society there. We've begun to see how, be it on social media or even at universities, how increasingly that was beginning to turn itself upside down.
Yeah, well, you brought up a number of things. If you don't mind, I'd like to go through them one by one. The timing of the October 7th event, the rest of the axis of resistance did not know about that particular time. They were involved, that they knew something was going to happen, but they didn't know it would happen on October 7th itself. So that timing got, the allies and the comrades and Hezbollah in Yemen, in Iran, that caught them off guard. If we look at the region as a whole, it's not just the October 7th cry for liberty that was stunning, but also what then happened in Syria. And we need to examine this regionally. the fall of the Syrian government and the imposition of the Al-Qaeda regime in Syria, which is what the Jolani Shara is, basically Al-Qaeda. He was a former member of Al-Qaeda. He was known to be on the terrorist watch list for the West. Not that the terrorist watch list of the West actually represents real terrorists, but he was a known terrorist according to every aspect of terrorism. So the removal of the Syrian government and the imposition of this sectarian terrorist in Syria, which then opened the floodgates for the Israeli army to invade further into Syria and to now occupy all of the Lebanese border with Syria. All that Lebanese border with Syria is now occupied by the Israeli army. And the Israeli army continues to attack Damascus and continues to attack various parts in Syria and continues to want to divide Syria along sectarian lines. So we have the cry for freedom on October 7th. We have the fall of the Syrian government. We then have, of course, it's been more than 1 year, but we are still in pain over the deliberate assassination of Samaht al-Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, Secretary General of Hezbollah, and what preceded that as the pager attacks that led to almost 3,000 people being injured. All of these, I think when we look at them in sequence, and we see that, yes, while we've had people resist and resist valiantly and resist heroically, at the same time, we have seen an increased spread of the Zionist military machine in the region and the increased support that Zionist military regime has gotten from certain Arab governments. So we have that is happening. And then because of social media, because of the ability for Palestinians to convey the horror that they are facing on Instagram, on Twitter, on TikTok, and because of the blatant representation of violence that Israeli officials, Israeli media condoned and applauded. They were being very open as to what they wanted to do to our people in Gaza. Because of both of these things, we have then seen a swell of anti-Zionist fervor, particularly captivate Europe, because in Europe it has been new that swell of fervor. In the United States, we have seen a shift now where the vast majority of Americans, when they are polled on their perspectives toward Israel, they are now much more anti-Israel than they were previously. The vast majority. We have seen the reverberations of that in the presidential election, that the main reason that people did not vote for the Democratic presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, was because of her stance in support of genocide. That was the main reason she did not get the Democratic votes. That was the main reason that Democrats stayed home and did not vote for her. And so we've seen all this swell, and we've seen the response to this, with now TikTok is being owned by an Israeli, of course, a vile Zionist, and we can see how those repercussions reverberate. But what I find to be most powerful on an international level is that what has happened over the past 2 years has been the fall of the farce of so-called Western democracy. The idea that there actually is democracy in the West, in Western European countries, we have seen the fall of that. We see that represented in Italy, where we've seen the marvelous stance of Italian unions and Italian people standing in solidarity with Palestinians, standing in opposition to genocide. And we have not seen that reverberated in the actions of the Italian government. We have seen the same in Germany, the same in the Netherlands, the same in France, to a lesser extent in Spain, although the Spanish government has taken positions, but nowhere near as what is necessary. So in many ways, we've seen the farce of Western democracy show itself. And of course, in the United States, it is a fool who thinks that this country is a democratic country in any way, shape, or, in any way. So
Yeah.
we've all seen that farce. And there is power in the unveiling of the truth. There is power in that. And amidst all of this, let us remember, amidst all of this, in the past 2 years, amidst the imposed famine on the Palestinians, amidst the unprecedented horror that has been imposed on Palestinians in Gaza, unprecedented, the highest number of child amputees in the world, in history, is right now the children in Gaza. Amidst that unprecedented horror, somehow, heroically and valiantly, the Palestinian armed resistance is continuing. So we've seen so many things happen in these past 2 years. And of course, we've seen the fall of the so-called international law. You know, where is international law? What does that represent? For many of us, we've always known that international law does not protect those of us who are black or brown. But now we've seen that been presented very powerfully around the world.
You spoke about how this was a catalyst for very many things. Let's start breaking them down, perhaps individually. I want to come back to Syria and why Syria was an important, I suppose, flashpoint of an area, not just for support for the resistance, but also Syria, the long-standing plan for Syria that started as back as the early 2000s. Well, in this current iteration, but many years ago already. But we've had, this attempt, to arm these mercenaries, essentially that were supported by the Israelis and the Turks, etc., to try and overthrow Syria. It was called the Syrian revolution of some sort. The fact that things played itself out in the way that it did at the end, it still leaves very many people confused. Did Bashar just flee and want to let go and let everything fall in the way that it did? And already, I suppose we're beginning to see the ramifications of the change in dispensation. And perhaps you can explain to us why Syria was always important and why what we see today is perhaps the reasons for why Syria needed to be protected.
Yes, thank you for that. There's lots of information. There's not real confirmation, but the information aligns itself with the theory that Bashar al-Assad did not flee, but Bashar al-Assad was taken. And he is now in Russia. He has not been given political asylum, by the way, in Russia. And so there would be lots of questions as to what led to that change in the Russian relationship with Syria. Does it have anything to do with the Russian war in Ukraine, etc.? It is unfortunate how we are pawns in the larger geopolitical game. But of course, and I have to say this up front, we must not think that the US opposition to the Syrian regime had anything to do with democracy or with human rights. It actually had much more to do with the Syrian government support for Hezbollah, the Syrian government allowing access for weapons and training to Hezbollah. The Syrian government was not in support of resistance in the Golan Heights, but was in support of resistance in Lebanon. That was the main reason that the US government has put its eyes on the Syrian regime and the Syrian government to have that change in power. And now we have, like I said, a terrorist in charge. Jolani is a terrorist who is not only supported by the Turks, but also very much supported by Wahhabism coming from Saudi Arabia. We have had thousands of Syrians being killed and beheaded in Syria in the time since he has taken over. Thousands of Syrians killed simply due to their sectarian affiliation, whether they are Shia, whether they are Alawis, whether they are Druze. So the Syria that many of us know is being fragmented and is being occupied and is being disintegrated in front of our eyes. The importance of Syria to Lebanon is it was literally its backbone. Geographically, it is extremely important to make sure that backbone, those borders with the West Beqa, those borders, Lebanon basically just to remind individuals, we have one border with the Mediterranean Sea, we have another border with occupied Palestine, and the vast majority of our land borders Syria. So if we can think about now that border is being controlled by the Israeli military, what are the ramifications that has on Lebanese sovereignty? What are the ramifications that has on the ability for the Lebanese armed resistance to protect Lebanon? So this is quite important for the region as a whole also, because we've also seen the Jolani regime speak openly about normalizing with the Zionist entity, speak openly about supporting and building friendly relationships with this existential enemy for us all. So yes, the fall of the Syrian regime does have serious ramifications on the region as a whole, if not beyond that.
And now we're, of course, seeing the attempts to disarm Hezbollah. And
Yes.
Hezbollah, was a very important player in the north. And it's, of course, not just about the liberation of Palestine, but also the continued threats, to Lebanese society, and the role that Hezbollah played as a social, political, and, of course, a military movement. Uh, was and again, just to take us back to that very dark day in the assassination of Said Hassan Nasrallah, the bunker buster bombs that were used to ensure that, of course, that there's no trace of life that is left. There was also the pager attacks and the targeted way in which clearly there was an attempt to break down Hezbollah. And we're now at a point where the Lebanese government, that of course is always a mess in terms of how it is composed, but that Lebanese government is now being pushed to not only just disarm Hezbollah, but ensure there is no trace left of Hezbollah, which again is a difficult thing to do. Speak to us about why the genocide in Gaza was more than just about at least for the region, it was more than just about the Palestinians. It was about trying to, I suppose, crush any forms of resistance to the Zionist entity, and why Said Hassan Nasrallah was precisely the target of that.
Again, so many things in that question. I want to start by having us recognize that Zionism is an existential threat to the region and possibly an existential threat to us all. Zionism is an expansionist, settler, colonial, supremacist ideology. Again, it is expansionist because it continues to want to take over more and more and more land. It is settler colonial because it wants to remove the indigenous communities that live on the land and replace them with one religious community. And it is supremacist because it fundamentally is based on and continues to present the idea that only Jews deserve rights. We've had minister after minister come out of the Zionist entity and specifically say that international law does not apply does not apply to Jews. It only applies to everyone else. So this kind of supremacist ideology, I mean, it makes the South African political apartheid seem like elementary compared to what Zionism has been doing for the past 78 years in our region and continues to want to do and has continued to expand its ideas. To support this expansionist, settler, colonial, supremacist ideology, Israel, of course, supports other supremacist ideologies around the world and supports other kinds of divisions around the world. So we see coming out of Israel, Israel is one of the top 10 military exporters of weapons. It is one of the prime supporters of supremacist dictators around the world. And of course, you all in South Africa know very well how Israel was a strong supporter of political apartheid in South Africa. So in that sense, that ideology is a threat to everyone around the world, and not only an existential threat to people of the region. With that foundation, we then look at Hezbollah and what Hezbollah has succeeded in doing. Hezbollah not only managed to liberate southern Lebanon in May 2000 from most of the Israeli occupation that began in 1978. Hezbollah then succeeded in liberating 20% of the Lebanese territory from the ISIS occupation. ISIS had come in from Syria and was occupying parts of Lebanon and was conducting massacres in Lebanon. And it was Hezbollah that liberated 20% of the country from ISIS. So we look at both of these as the ability for Hezbollah to defend Lebanon. And it has this ability, particularly because the Lebanese army has not had the ability to defend the country. So that is why we have had to build a popular resistance, because the state has rejected the concept of defending itself. The Lebanese military has not been allowed, neither by foreign powers nor by domestic powers in Lebanon, to actually have the military ability to defend its borders. The Lebanese army does not have one functioning helicopter. Just to give you an example, not one functioning helicopter does the Lebanese army have. The Lebanese army has only been allowed to equip itself as a police force within Lebanon, something that the US envoy to Lebanon said very clearly, that the Lebanese army should only be allowed to have weapons to fight against other Lebanese. Made that explicitly clear. And so now we have after the huge blow that was given to Hezbollah leadership and to the Hezbollah cadre through the criminal pager attacks that harmed more than 3,000 men, women, and children in Lebanon, and to the assassination of two of the leadership of Hezbollah, both Samaht Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah and Al-Amin Al-Am Hashim Safieddin, both of whom were assassinated. Nasrallah was assassinated with an 80 ton bunker buster bomb, 80 tons of bombage were used with the US green light, with the green light of then Vice President Kamala Harris to assassinate this leader. Nevertheless, Hezbollah has remained standing. Yes, it is weaker today, but it has remained standing. And we have seen them stand because over the past year, and you could have seen that just a few weeks ago in the 1 year anniversary, 1 year commemoration of the death of Hassan Nasrallah, we saw hundreds of thousands of people in Lebanon mourn together and vow together to continue the fight. And Iran is continuing to support Lebanon in this fight to build and stand with the Lebanese resistance. But when we look at that, and then we look at who right now is prime minister, Nawaf Salam is not a lover of Lebanese liberty, but rather a lover of Western imperialism. Same with the Lebanese president, both of whom were put into power under huge US duress, under huge duress imposed by the United States. And we have primarily the Lebanese prime minister right now that is pushing for the Lebanese army to disarm Hezbollah. And what they do when they disarm Hezbollah, by the way, the Lebanese army doesn't take those weapons. Those weapons are then destroyed. Imagine what kind of a country would do this? What kind of a government would destroy weapons when, let us remember, Israel has continued and continues until today to kill Lebanese through targeted assassinations, through targeted drones, and continues to bomb Lebanese villages around the border with occupied Palestine. Just yesterday, we had an elderly woman and her husband killed in a drone attack while they were in southern Lebanon on their way just to get bread. So while Lebanon continues to be under Israeli attack, we have the Lebanese prime minister seeking to disarm Hezbollah. Of course, Hezbollah will refuse the disarmament. And if the Lebanese army cows to the pressure of the Lebanese government and the US, then we may very well be erupting into a civil war in Lebanon. Because the disarmament of Hezbollah, not only, I believe, is an act of treason, but it would be an act to completely open Lebanese borders to Israeli aggression. And to anyone who thinks that collaboration with Israel will lead to peace and safety, let us look no further than the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority in the West Bank that was built upon the concept of security coordination with the enemy, again, which is treason, security coordination with the enemy. That is all they have been doing, is prohibiting Palestinians from resisting the occupation in the West Bank. And what do we see happening now in the West Bank? The annexation of the occupied territories and massive expansion of Israeli occupation in the West Bank and a massive expansion of Jewish settler attacks against Palestinian homes. So we have seen the evidence in the West Bank that collaboration and normalization with the enemy does not lead to peace. We have seen that with the Syrian terrorist government that has collaborated and is trying to normalize relationships with Israel, and the Israeli attacks continue in Syria, as well as the Israeli occupation continues to expand in Syria. Why do we think it's going to be any different in Lebanon?
Which is, I suppose, also the test then for Iran, and to which extent Iran is willing to find a diplomatic solution from this ongoing manufactured crisis about nuclear proliferation and so on. This past 2 years has also, of course, seen Iran square center there in the battling, of course, with Israel. And we saw the beating that Iran gave to Israel. Let's look at how Iran fits into this a broader picture. There was, of course, the skirmishes that I'm referring to, but upon reflection, in the way that those matters got not entirely settled, but took a pause in some way because there's again an agitation for an attack on Iran. Is Iran really the end goal here to try and weaken any resistance to American imperialism and Israeli, I suppose, hegemony in the area, and not just hegemony, but any sort of resistance to this is Israeli project, as it were. What's your reading on now, having thought back on Iran and the attack on Iran, and what that demonstrates?
It demonstrates that the United States, once again, has shown that it does not care about negotiations. It does not care about diplomacy. It does not even care about nuclear proliferation. It cares about making sure that countries around the region do not have the military nor the economic ability to defend themselves from Israeli aggression. And so Iran will not be the end goal. Iran is simply another country that Israel wants to attack and weaken in its slew of countries. Let us remember, Israel is expansionist. So it wants to continue to expand and continue to gain further and further control in the region. So if the Iranian government succumbs, which it won't, but if it succumbs to this pressure, and if it falls or seeks to align itself or normalize itself with Israel, just like the countries in the Arab Gulf have done, then it will also fall. And Israeli expansion will only continue. Again, look at the example of Qatar. Qatar, which is a country that has tried to seek so-called neutrality, tried to present itself as a mediator, tried not to be part of the axis of resistance, and Qatar got attacked, by Israel. So again, we see that the options given to us around the world are very, very simple. Either we resist, and the resistance has to include military resistance. The resistance has to include armed resistance. The resistance has to be all encompassing. Either we resist Zionism or we will face the boot of Zionism. There is no space in between. And I would challenge, find me a real democratic country, a real country built on democratic principles that has managed to collaborate with the state of Israel and has managed to continue to exist in its democratic form. And I would argue there isn't one.
Yeah,
So this is the choice that we have. We have seen that very clearly right now with the Sumud flotilla. That the Sumud flotilla shows us once again that the only way Israel responds is through violence. And as powerful as the Sumud flotilla has been, that I think that the stronger message that it gives us is the importance for countries to be true to their responsibilities according to the Genocide Convention and to intervene militarily against Israel. This is where we need to be. It is too late now to simply talk about trade embargoes, to simply be, stopping military relationships with Israel. That should have happened 2 years ago. We are at the stage right now where we need military intervention to stop this monster. This is what is needed. And this is what is the legal responsibility for countries that have signed the Genocide Convention. This is their legal responsibility. And it is only Yemen that is fulfilling its legal responsibility right now.
And that responsibility has often been termed as complicated for whatever reasons. We saw, some countries, a handful of them at the United Nations, not necessarily calling for military intervention, but talking about, a military peacekeeping force of some sort. The language is still, being sanitized in that sort of way. I want to then dovetail that with you cited Qatar there, the Gulf countries, etc. The UAE has completely given up on the Palestinians. They want the Palestinians gone. They were never ever, I suppose, had the interests of the Palestinians in mind. What do we now understand by? Just today is we look at the anniversary of the assassination of Anwar Sadat and look how that certainly played itself out, but. We're at a moment where some serious questions are being asked about the lie and the deception of the Muslim and Arab worlds. We knew that Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, etc. They're not necessarily friends of the Palestinians. Some of them signed up to this Abrahamic Accords. It is Saudi Arabia that continues to shoot down missiles that's coming from Yemen when they don't quite have to do that, and so it leaves. I read on Al Mayadeen just a short while ago about the way in which this peace deal that Trump is talking about, the so-called peace deal, how that was landed, and apparently it was a lot of these Arab country and their leaders that were pushing for some of these concessions certainly to be made. And I'll come to the deal separately in just a bit, but I want to just spend a moment to reflect and pause on the Arab conscience, as you know, that famous song that Damir al-Arabi so contemplates, and it's so true for many years later about the treachery almost of the Arab world, at least those represented in the Gulf countries. Is this a seminal moment in looking at how these countries will, in the near future, begin to either, I don't know, either find themselves on the Palestinian cause, or has that cause been lost a long time ago, and it's kind of useless fighting with them about it?
I think we need to really separate between the governments and the people. The people of Saudi Arabia are valiant in their support for justice. The government, which is a dictatorship, which is a monarchy, which imagine a country that is named after a family. Saudi Arabia is named after the Saud family. Imagine the arrogance of that. They are different. And I think when we look at these governments, we find that it's not that they are against Palestinians. It is that they are against justice, because we see them impose repressive means against their own people. We see this in Bahrain, the dictatorship and the sectarian nature of the Bahraini government. Same with Saudi Arabia. We see it in the UAE, which has transformed its country into a playground for the rich rather than being protective of its own people. So I think when we see the governments in that light, when we see that these are dictatorial governments, that these are governments that are propped up by US military bases, governments that fulfill Western imperialism, then we see that, of course, they will stand against Palestinian liberation, just as they stand against democracy, just as they stand against labor rights, just as they stand against any semblance of real justice. All the while, they stand in support of presenting this mirage of liberalism to appease the West, not to actually be real to themselves and be a real country of equality. That is not their objective. So I think when we look at it that way, then we're able to recognize once again how supporting Zionism and supporting imperialism is a support for dictatorship and is an affront against democracy. And we see that happening in Europe. When we look at Germany, I mean, the way that the German police are being violent against German protesters in support of Palestine it should be reminiscent of Nazi Germany. We see that in England, where now you could protest in England and say that you are in support of genocide and that would be acceptable, but you cannot protest and say you are in opposition to genocide. That is not acceptable. Imagine what these governments have to do to present themselves and to pass laws that are so in opposition to basic decency. So again, I think it's critical for us to look at Palestinian liberation as being part of any liberation for democracy, any liberation for economic justice, any liberation that will free us from the chains of militarization, free us from the chains of capitalism, and of course, free us from imperialism. It is with that lens that I look at the Arab governments as stooges, as they have always been, because they have been propped up by those by imperialism, by capitalism, and of course by the United States. So it is that regard that I look at them. And the people are quite something else. Same when we look at Egypt, and somebody reminded me that the date of the assassination of Samaht Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was the same date as the death of Jamal Abdel Nasser, and how far we have fallen in the region from the time of Jamal Abdel Nasser to then when we got Anwar al-Sadat and Hosni Mubarak and Morsi and now Sisi. Like every leader since has gone from bad to worse since the time of the great Jamal Abdel Nasser.
We're talking to Dr. Rania Masri, a Palestinian-Lebanese human rights activist, environmental scientist, and university professor. And she's, of course, an author, a writer as well. We are looking back 2 years since the October 7th anniversary. And this, of course, is analysis brought to you by Radio 786. Let's try and understand now the ways within which I want to deal a little bit with this idea of the legitimacy that some want to give to settlers, right? And we see this play out in different ways. That there's supposedly a liberal settler that's protesting their government's actions in Gaza, if that is even a legitimate paradigm. So there's that particular element, and then to contrast it with the increasing vocalized support for a Palestinian state, a two-state solution, without quite defining what that is. I know those are two rather big subjects, but I want to bring it together because on the one end, there's this idea that you have an ultra right-wing settler and you have a moderate liberal settler, and one is better than the other.
Yeah, yeah. I'm so glad that you brought that up because I've also been seeing in a lot of progressive news this idea that it is just Benjamin Netanyahu. It is just this particular Israeli government. We need to recognize that according to Israeli polls, the vast majority, I am talking about 80% and higher, of the Jewish Israeli society supports the genocide. The vast majority of Israeli institutions support the genocide. These are including the doctors, including medical associations in Israel supporting the genocide and slaughter of children. Let us remember that the largest protest to take place, the protest that erupted was the protest in Israel against the punishment to be given to Israeli soldiers who had raped Palestinian prisoners. So this was what outraged them, that now in Israel it is legal for an Israeli to rape a Palestinian because, again, Palestinians are lesser than, it's not considered rape. So when you tell me that there is a liberal settler or a right-wing settler, to me that's like a kind supremacist. Oh, he's a kind racist versus an evil racist. It doesn't make a difference. You have an entire society, and I'm not exaggerating, an entire society that breeds itself on the concept of supremacy. What kind of goodness could come out of this society? A society that teaches its children in their school system that Arabs should be killed or should be made into slaves. A society in which the rabbis stand up time and time again and justify the killing of children in Gaza. This is Israeli society. So again, let us be very clear. This is not a fight against the Likud versus the Labor. This is not a fight against one kind of settler versus another. This is not a fight against Benjamin Netanyahu versus, oh, if only Rabin were to come back. We need to recognize that, again, when you have an ideology like Zionism, it ends up breeding supremacy that is this vile. Supremacy that is this vile, that justifies and applauds the slaughter of children. The most popular channel right now in Israel is a channel that broadcasts the murder of Palestinians in Gaza with applause and with glee. They are celebrating and are being gleeful, about the slaughter of children. They are taking target practice. They're making target practice on Palestinian children in Gaza. Every day, the Israeli soldiers choose a different body part of the Palestinian children to target, be it the head, be it the chest, be it the groin. This is an entirely sick society, and it is indicative of the level of racism that Western society has, that they ask the Palestinians to de-radicalize themselves rather than to ask the Israelis to denazify themselves. Actually, I apologize here because the Israelis have shown themselves to be more vile than the Nazis, more vile on every single aspect. So we need to acknowledge that. I'm very glad that you brought that up because there's no such thing as a good settler. And the vast majority of the protests in Israel, the large ones, have not been calling for an end to the slaughter in Gaza, but rather have been calling for the return of their hostages. And seeing the end of the bombing as a means for the return of their hostages, not to end the killing because the killing of Palestinians is wrong. And the times that it gets into the news, and it makes the New York Times or it reaches Haaretz, is about how hard it is on the Israeli soldiers to commit these massacres, how hard it is on their mental status to commit the massacre. That's why they want to stop the killing, not because the killing is wrong, but because it's being hard on their souls to kill so many of us. So again, let's be very clear in our language. Israel right now is a society of psychopaths, of sociopaths, of supremacists. And that society needs to be isolated. That society needs to be treated in the manner that it has been treating Palestinians. If any of us believe in equality, that is what we need to be doing. Now, with regards to the two-state solution, I find it to be such a distraction and such an evil distraction for states around the world to now be saying, oh, we want to recognize a Palestinian state. What does that mean? It means nothing. It's a distraction. I am not a supporter of a two-state solution. I don't even know what borders the two-state solution would even have, because a two-state solution accepts apartheid. A two-state solution accepts supremacy. It accepts occupation. What we have been calling for from the start, from the 1970s, is a one-state solution where we are all treated as equals, with the full reparations for each and every one of our refugees and their descendants, and for our legal and moral and ethical right to go back to our villages wherever they be. And the only reason that has been rejected is because of the supremacist, racist ideology of Zionism. No other reason. Now we are questioning whether we can actually be able to live with such a society of sociopaths. How can we ever be able to live alongside a society that has applauded and supported the murder of our children and the starvation of our families? But any acceptance of a two-state solution, let us make it very clear, is an acceptance of apartheid. It is an acceptance of occupation. It is an acceptance of supremacy. And we need to reject it full force. And we need to stop asking Palestinians to compromise. We have compromised far too long on far too much. Palestinians should not be asked to compromise or to negotiate. We are asking for the implementation of full international law. And we are asking for the serial killers to be treated in the courts of law as they must, to be treated in The Hague, to be tried in The Hague, each and every one of them, from the soldiers to the media personalities, to their generals, to their ministers. And I would love to be able to send to The Hague every single individual and institution around the world that has applauded or funded this genocide to also be sent to The Hague. It is time for the tables to be turned.
Also, that they could be met on the battlefield, I suppose, as
Oh, yes.
well.
Yes.
Dr. Masri, how do we then understand the supposed Trump peace plan?
Oh my God. It's the beauty of the Trump administration is that it is so honest in its vileness. It's not that they're more evil than the Democrats. They're just more transparent. This so-called peace plan is none other than a real estate plan, which again, let us remember what the United States is. The United States is also a settler colony. The United States is also a country that was built on settler colonialism and a country that continues until today to violate its treaties with First Nation communities, Democrat and Republican, each and every one of them. They have yet to pay reparations to the First Nation communities in this country whose land they have stolen. They have yet to pay reparations to the African American communities whose bodies they have stolen. So what else can we expect from such a government? Again, red or blue, Democrat or Republican. It is simply a distraction, to continue ethnic cleansing, to continue supremacy, and to promote real estate, which is typical of Trump. What was brilliant and once again demonstrated the heroism and the intelligence and the beauty of the English language is the response from the Islamic resistance. It's the response from Hamas. The way that they responded to the Trump so-called proposal was diplomatic and shrewd and brilliant. They accepted the humanitarian points. The end of war, the entry of aid, the prisoner exchange, the rejection of displacement, but under conditions that exposed Israel's refusal to do the same. And they managed to have Trump actually quote them. And here we have an official statement from the White House referring to what is happening in Gaza as genocide and referring to the need to implement international law. It was brilliant. The move from Hamas was brilliant. At the same time, let us remember that since that moment, even though the Trump administration continues to say that, oh, there has been a ceasefire, the Israeli military continues to illegally and criminally attack and kill Palestinians. There is an average of 100 Palestinians that are killed directly by Israel every single day since the so-called ceasefire proposal and since the time that Trump has been saying, oh, there's been no fighting. It's still an average of 100 killed directly. I am not even talking about the many, many, many that are starved to death, and the many that suffer from malnutrition, and the many injured that end up dying because of lack of medication and lack of healthcare support.
Do you think that and I agree with you. And initially, when I saw Hamas, when I read the headline, at least, I was a little bit taken aback. And then, of course, I think these guys were counting on, to use their language, crazy Arab militants, that will just reject it, and that will give Netanyahu, the green light to continue to commit the genocide. But it was a marvelous act of diplomacy that we saw on the part of Hamas. Where does this then place, the Israeli regime in how then it contemplates an actual ceasefire and what an ending of the war looks like? Because now Netanyahu has already begun to talk about, yeah, well, you see, the draft or the deal has two different stages, but he's again, doubling down on this idea of an Israeli military presence in Gaza. We, of course, don't quite know what's going to happen, not just in next week, but tomorrow. Things are changing so very quickly. But if you were to try and chart a path here, does that lead us to having an actual military presence in Gaza, and to the extent to which that is, I mean, I don't want to say a plausible idea, but with genocide being committed, who knows what could happen? So what is your reading of what the next step could look like?
Well, what it could look like and what it will look like are two very different things. Let us also remember that the moment that President Trump declared the ceasefire proposal, with Israeli support, Netanyahu immediately went and spoke to the Israeli press and said, "Don't worry, we won't do it." So even before Hamas responded, Netanyahu was making it clear to the Israeli press in Hebrew that he would not abide by it, and that the military occupation of Gaza is still part of the Israeli plan. So we've seen them just continuing. I mean, for the past 2 years, and this is not the first time, by the way, Hamas has said yes to a US proposal, and then Israel has said no. This is not the first time that they have done that. So unfortunately, what we are expecting to come out of Israel is simply more killing, more starvation, more ethnic cleansing, more destruction. We have seen that simply continue. And again, not simply in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. The question goes to us. How are we going to be stopping this? What is our plan to be stopping this, both as people and particularly for you all in South Africa, given the stance that the South African government took, almost more than a year ago? Well, where is the follow-up? It has been 1 year, and the International Court of Justice has not fulfilled its agreement because it's been 1 year. Israel has not fulfilled what was deemed necessary to it legally by the court. And then what? So the question goes back to those governments around the world who claim to be with peace and with human rights. Where is South Africa's position in supporting the Colombian president on the Uniting for Peace resolution? Where is the South African position on being firmer against Israel and against Zionism? We can only expect from Israel more of the same, more death, more destruction, more killing, until they are stopped. But they will not stop on their own.
And so you speak with, such determination and clarity, Dr. Rania. I must, confess that I, like very many people around the world, throughout this 2 years, go through different emotions. There's the one day ready to go to battle, and the next day crying and about, the extent of the suffering. And it's very difficult to not have sometimes that suffering touch you on a human level, and then sometimes to the point where one questions whether all is lost. But as we know that every single day, the Palestinians in Gaza, the very brave men and women are fighting and are resisting. And so, one then would sometimes feel guilty about, feeling that particular way. And so I want to maybe just take a pause for a moment and maybe what advice you have for very many people that either feel despondent, feel that they cannot do much, or feel as if though they are too overcome by the scenes of genocide on our TV screens that, it's become too much. What advice do you have for them?
I hear that very much. I hear that very much. But I think that these two emotions go together. We can feel hopeless and continue the fight at the same time. One does not continue the fight because one is hopeful that we're going to achieve liberty within a few months. I think we continue the fight because we have no other option. And to bring that home and to make us feel it emotionally. I also remember a friend of mine who is from Gaza who made it clear to me more than a year ago that he refuses to watch the news and he wants to focus all his energy on building. So he has managed to build wonderful resistance in North Carolina. So what does it take to keep your emotions in check, to make sure that you do not fall into despair? What does it take for you to continue the fight and find a way to do that and to continue the fight? If that means to rest for a week, rest for a week. If that means to limit the amount of news and pictures you allow yourself to see from Gaza, then limit it. If that means that you have to go back and every now and then rewatch a particular speech by a particular leader that inspires you, do that. Remember, for all of us outside of Palestine, we have a choice to rest. But our families, our loved ones in Palestine do not even have that choice. They do not even get the choice to rest. So how do we balance that? And my last recommendation is allow yourself some time every week to envision a liberation. I remember that, more than 10 years ago when I was visiting South Africa, I was asked by a comrade in South Africa, what is our plan post-liberty in Palestine? What kind of economic situation, what kind of economic plan do we want to build? And I remember I told him, come what may, let us just achieve liberty first. And he said, no, you plan for what you will do once you achieve the liberty while you are fighting for liberty. That becomes essential. And I think he meant that strategically, but for me, I also take that emotionally. Spend some time envisioning what that liberty will feel like, what that liberty will be like, and take the strength that that imagining gives your soul and now continue the fight forward.
Dr. Rania Masri, thank you very much for your very insightful input in observing this very key anniversary and a moment. And we pray and hope that, very soon we will talk about a liberated Palestine with that vision of what that, day will look like. It will be a sweet day, a very, very
Will
sweet day.
come.
So you leave us with some homework to imagine and to imagine a world where Palestinians indeed will be free one day. Thank you very much for having joined
Thank
us.
you.
Have a lovely day further, and you go well. Thank you very much. Bye bye.
All the best to you all. Thank you.